Welcome, everybody. So my name is Eric Hansen, and I'm from a company called Fuze, and I'm joined here by one of our customers, Andy Yates. We're going to talk to you a little bit about some interesting things around the app generation, around user adoption, user experience, kind of our experiences in the real world. So wanted to introduce Andy, and then I'll go ahead and get started, and then the bulk of the presentation is actually going to be me interviewing Andy, talking about some of the things that they're finding at ThoughtWorks, which is a company of over 4,000 employees, working across 34 countries, really pushing the envelope in terms of collaboration technologies. So we'll get into that in just a minute. So just a little bit about my background. So I actually started as a Fuze customer, and specific to the entertainment space. I ran a visual effects company based in San Francisco. I did visual effects for companies, for projects like Avatar, Hunger Games, horrible films like After Earth starring Will Smith, but it had really good visual effects. And then also working with advertising agencies, people like Ogilvy Mather, which is a global advertising agency. And the trick about those projects was really around the distribution of labor and talent. It's a market that is very thin in terms of margins, so you have to be very, very intelligent about how you work with remote teams in areas that have lower cost of living or taking advantage of tax incentives in places like the UK or Eastern Europe. And so what you find is that the creative teams that you work with to deliver that work is very, very distributed. And so, for example, on Avatar, we had probably hundreds of artists that we were working with in other companies, collaborating with on a daily basis using different types of collaboration technologies that we had cobbled together. And then towards the end of my stay at that company, before I sold it, we actually moved to Fuze, and it really brought a lot of those technologies into one specific app that was very flexible in terms of supporting desktop, but also mobile. We had visual effects supervisors that would go on location, and they needed to be able to stay connected and also review content. And so it was a very powerful platform for being able to do that. So as I left, I realized that our experience at my company was not unique. That there were a lot of other companies in different industries that faced the same types of challenges, and their process, even though they're not putting pretty pixels on the screen, was very similar to ours. Where they were basically going from concept to delivering a product, whether they were in finance, whether they were manufacturing a physical good, or like Andy's company, doing software development or software consulting and professional services. The actual process of starting with a whiteboard or a concept and then seeing that all the way through and managing different teams that are geographically distributed or remote. I mean, the reality is that remote work is not about being in your pajamas on a couch any longer, right? It's about your office being able to go with you wherever you are and whatever your circumstances are. And so that's really what we're going to try and get into today. So alignment in that scenario is very critical. Having teams that can gel, having teams, especially when you have language barriers or, again, you're geographically distributed. I put this image up with this Boeing 777 because if you think about the automotive industry or the airline industry, right? These are companies that produce products based on a number of subcontractors that largely won that business based on the lowest bid, right? So alignment and scope are incredibly important to that process. As you go from concept, as you go through engineering, as you go through actually delivering that product, marketing that product, all of these different cross-functional teams need to be able to communicate in a very seamless way, regardless of device, right? So that's, alignment is really critical in terms of all of the stakeholders, all of the people that are involved in those projects. And when you think about it, Gartner actually predicted a few years ago that 75% of the Global 2000 would be distributed by now. And in reality, it's more like 87%. And the interesting phenomenon that's happening is that over 50% of those people don't think that the tools provided by IT actually support distributed work. So they feel very disconnected from their organizations. And that has a real meaningful impact in terms of their level of engagement, in terms of the rapport that they're capable of building with their peers that are in maybe different offices, in terms of their feeling that there's support for the devices that they actually use, whether it's a mobile phone or whether it's being able to take their office with them and be anywhere on their laptop. So it's a really critical thing that in terms of how you solve that problem. And it's compounded by the fact that now there's, what's the number, 2.5 billion millennials now make up over 50% of the workforce. And this is a generation that has never known a professional experience that didn't include a smartphone or a smart device, right? So again, they're looking, the app generation, the millennial generation, are really looking for richer experiences, which include the ability or the flexibility to have face-to-face interaction, the ability to more deeply go, get into content collaboration, to on an ad hoc basis have instant connectivity, again, regardless of device. That's really what that demographic is looking for, and what, as IT professionals, we need to be able to support that flexibility to really drive the most value out of those individuals and the greatest productivity. So again, that's some of what Andy's going to get into in just a second, but I just wanted to point that out. And I'm going to put my company hat back on now for a second. So at Fuze, the way that we think about it is we really think about this app generation. We really think about the user. I mean, that's everything for us really centers on user experience. IT is very important. The security is obviously very important. But what we're really building our products for is to really drive productivity and simplicity for the actual user. So again, we really think about putting the U back in unified communication. I mean, that's, it's sort of our marketing tagline right now. But it really is at the essence of what we're doing. So it's really about bringing, for us, it's about creating a platform, single architecture that supports business voice, video, and security, both for individual communication as well as group communication, audio conferencing, video conferencing, both within your organization, but also outside your organization. I think that that's really unique. And the other thing that we really think a lot about is the ability to take analytics, real-time, real-world analytics around user behavior and feeding that back into the system and taking publicly available information as well to provide context and insight to the communication. So it's almost like thinking of caller ID on steroids. When somebody calls you, most people just look at the phone number and you're not sure what to do, right? But the way that we think of it is we actually have available information based on the way that we've designed the platform to feed information back into that and provide context. So you know that a customer has called that's really important, and maybe they have 5 Zendesk tickets open. So we can actually feed that back into the system and provide that information before you pick up the phone, so you have a context and you have a better interaction with that individual once you get them on the phone, right? So that's really how we think of the world in terms of how we're designing our apps. And again, it's really focused on the user. So this is just a quick screenshot of what I'm talking about, just to kind of reinforce that. Single application, soft phone capability, integrated video conferencing, video chat, persistent group messaging, content collaboration built all into a single context, and again, device agnostic, right? So it's really designed mobile first, and then also desktop and laptop. So it's really about supporting that interaction from the phone in your pocket to any screen on a wall or any cubicle or wherever you are with your laptop. Okay. So at the end, it's really about, from our perspective, it's about empowering the connected worker across any device, right? It's about empowering the app generation so that we can all be in more than one place at once, and that's really how we view the world. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and ask Andy some questions, and then there's some time permitting at the end. We'd love to answer any questions that you might have. You want to go ahead and... Andy, maybe you can give a little bit of background while I'm grabbing the iPad.
Okay, sure. So just to let you guys know, has anybody heard of ThoughtWorks? Has anybody heard of us at all? A couple. Often a couple. We're a global technology consultancy. We're custom software delivery, well known in agile or lean circles or for continuous delivery. We have, our clients generally are folks where software is a business differentiator, which is increasingly everybody, but those where it's really sort of core to what their business is and what it does. As you mentioned, we've got 4,000 employees spread across 14 countries, 34 offices, 35 offices. It seems to increase every time I have the conversation. And we've been growing 20% year on year for the last 15 years in terms of headcount. And a large part of that is Global South. China, India, Brazil. But beyond that, the number of locations that we work in is much greater, because typically, being people who are into agile software, we will work with the people we're building software for, and we'll be doing that at the client site in their offices.
Great. Make it a little easier. All right. So first of all, again, Andy, thanks for doing this with us. Really appreciate it. So one of the things that we wanted to talk to you about was how you define mobile. You know, it's kind of evolved. Obviously, initially, mobile meant everything around smartphones, smart devices. Just curious, you know, from your perspective, based on a very distributed organization, how you view the world of mobile, or what defines mobile.
Yeah, sure. And so, you know, obviously, when you hear the word mobile, first thing that springs to mind is handset, or form factor, and how that allows you to think about different tasks to be performed, and how that opens up different contexts for you to do work in. And that obviously has a benefit in terms of improved efficiencies and effectiveness. But really, beyond that, for us, we think about how do we enable our people to work in other locations, and specifically in client offices. And really, in that way, for us, mobile is the laptop. The laptop was actually the original mobile device. And for us, being able to put our company culture into those other spaces is really important. And we do that through that mobile laptop.
So what, just to kind of back up for a second. So when you're thinking about that, first of all, so you actually obviously have physical locations in certain places, and I know you don't technically have a real headquarters, you know, it's kind of everywhere, but you actually, you know, good percentage of your employees are actually in client facilities, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, just to kind of clarify that.
And so we're trying to figure out, like, we have 34 offices. We have people working in those offices, depending on global north, global south divide. Generally, although decreasingly, we're seeing people actually across the world working for clients on those client sites. And we're trying to figure out not just how do you take your files, your work, but how do you take that connection to the company with you when you're in those other places?
So that tells me that you guys value sort of the company culture and making sure that your employees feel connected. What's your experience been on that front, and just in terms of when you don't have that, what happens?
I mean, we've been striving really hard for the last 15 years to make sure that that does happen.
Yeah.
People do get disconnected, and they get disconnected pretty quick. And so it really is something that's IT's core job, not just to provide functionality for the people in our offices, but to provide the same level of functionality no matter where people are.
So I'm going to go a little out of order. I know we sort of prepped in terms of the questions that I was going to ask you, but I think that really leads nicely into kind of your initiative at ThoughtWorks around, you know, going to a serverless office, right?
Right.
So maybe you could talk a little bit about, you know, that initiative and sort of why, because it really does get back to that connectivity and that level of engagement with the employees. Yeah,
I mean, it's a natural extension of that same set of thinking. So once we start thinking about providing the office as a laptop, then we're looking at services are provided in the cloud. We tell our clients to push things to the cloud. We do it ourselves. We start to then think about how do we take those other services that would be provided by an office and again make those available to people elsewhere. But also it starts to make us think about why do we privilege the office in terms of access and security and so on. So what we're starting to think about is, can we take file servers out, push those to the cloud? Can we take telephones out, push that to the cloud? Can we take other services that we're providing and essentially collapse our networks, remove that from the office and make it virtual, so that we're making it a level playing field no matter where our people are, whether they come into the office or whether they don't, make our offices essentially cafes. One of the really nice things about this, one of the really subtle things that we started to realize is that when we hadn't been doing this, what we were essentially doing was privileging those people who are office-based. They didn't have to go through the same hoops, they didn't have to do the same sort of incantations to log in. They've got the network, right? and we were privileging them and pushing pain to the people who are outside of the office. By making it equal, we're actually now able to better prioritize the work that we need to do because everyone's in the same situation.
Got it. Got it. That's great. So can you talk a little bit about how you think about user experience and adoption versus, say, security, and how you balance those different things? Because sometimes it's not easy to do, and kind of how again, the value of user experience, adoption, obviously the focus on users without giving up security.
Yeah, I mean, user experience is, for us, is critical. If something's not usable, people won't use it. They'll resent you for forcing them to use it, and ultimately they'll be unproductive, or the applications will fail. In an organization like ours, we're a very flat structure, we're very non-hierarchical. We have very, very technically capable people. If we try and provide them applications that they don't like, that aren't useful, they'll go and find something else. And they'll install something else, and they'll set it up, and they'll build the servers, and they'll do it. And that leads to a sense of fragmentation. It leads to increased costs because of that kind of fragmentation. It leads to disconnection from our people. Ultimately, a lack of trust. Our job is to provide that set of services. If we're not providing them properly, people aren't going to use them.
Right.
That, in turn, has an effect on things like security. If people are using shadow IT kinds of services, then we aren't able to secure them. And so really, for us, security is a function of usability. Got it.
Got it. That's great. So in terms of, it'd be great maybe as it relates to that, just to talk about how you make decisions within your organization, and top down versus bottom up. Maybe using your Fuze experience as the example. The story you were telling me last night,
sure.
I think might be really useful in this context, because it ties back to that. Giving you the ability to mitigate shadow IT, right? And to provide a more secure environment where the users are actually more engaged.
Yeah, so the need for video conferencing came from our people. The need for communications tools came from our people. They were already out there and using things before a central IT of any kind was involved. And that demand then turned to a demand on IT to say, hey, can you provide this for us? Can you provide something that will work? And we were aiming to be a company where our people like choice. They like to figure out what works in different contexts. And when we're talking about a global rollout, we know that some things will work better in some places, other things will work better elsewhere for different people, different contexts. So our initial approach, we actually chose 2 different tools and said, okay, you can choose A or B, up to you. Off you go.
And Fuze was one of those.
Fuze was one of those. And so we said, off you go. And after a while, our people came back to us and they started saying, well, we don't like this choice. Stop making us choose. And we were like, we didn't get it, right? We were like, why would you make us choose? Why would you not want the choice that we're giving you? Obviously, different contexts. So,
well, can you also say, what was happening in terms of that, right? Because you narrowed it down to 2, and what was the result?
The result was, every single time somebody wanted to talk to somebody else, there was a micro-negotiation. I want to use A, I want to use B, let's use Skype, what's your ID? I'm not telling you my ID. That kind of back and forth for every single conversation didn't work. And so, essentially, our people came back to us and said, all right, choose one. We chose Fuze. There were some people who were like, oh no, I meant choose my one. But actually, the reason for choosing Fuze is also, I think it's interesting, hopefully. The reason we went with Fuze was not necessarily it had exactly the perfect feature set around the world, because nothing exists that has exactly the right feature set for everybody around the world. What we did was we chose the company that worked together with us. We chose something that had enough to satisfy most people, but then a company that would work with us to improve that where we noticed problems. And we think that the reason I'm here is the same thing. We think that finding people that we can work with in this way is a much more effective way of choosing applications for us than just choosing something based on features and functionality.
That's great. So obviously, one of the things we're showing at this show is kind of the converged experience that I talked about. It'd be great if you could a lot of people are starting to look at the convergence of these different communication technologies or feature sets. It'd be great to get your perspective on, because you were privy to the Fuze vision pretty early on, and as somebody that's managing the type of team that you're managing worldwide, it'd be great to get some feedback just in terms of what you think about where we're headed.
Right, and as a business, we want a unified tool. Like, we want a single tool that does everything for a couple of different reasons. One of those is it reduces that kind of cost of choice, the negotiation that happens at each point. We also see that transition from one mode of communication to another, whether that's email to chat to voice to video, or whether that's from a phone to a laptop to a room. Those things are places where there's value in smoothing things out, and
sure.
We like that. As a business, we really like that. I also think about it as an individual, and as an individual, working within my business, my context is great, right? Like I can put the boundaries around that, and that's all good. But I don't just work with people at my company. I work with partners, with vendors, with clients, with I spend time talking to friends and family. Like I have a number of different folks that I'm talking to around the world, in all sorts of different capacities, and so I can't, as a business, bound that context, right? I can't put constraints around that. And so as an individual, I'm always going to be living in a fractured ecosystem. I'm always going to have those kinds of micro negotiations. And so what we've been talking about, and where I think we should be thinking about, is how do we start to bridge those gaps? How do we start to put in place standards and ways of communicating so that people are able to have their own choice, but still interact with others who've made different choices? We've been talking in terms of the Fuze and the Fuze context, and I think Fuze has got an interesting leg up in this. I mean, obviously, telephony does work in this way. That's great. The video conferencing also came from a place where it was about connecting systems within my organization. I can connect my different interesting sort of legacy systems or different hardware kits into a cloud system. And
that's actually a great point. So ThoughtWorks is actually using Fuze both for individual users, but they actually have a huge installation of a software-based rooms product with the same experience that users experience on their mobile and desktop computers. So that's actually a good point that you guys are doing that.
And I think that the interconnectivity between those different kinds of systems is the first step in something where we need to start thinking about how do we cross organizations? How do we work across organizations? And with those, you talked about app generation. Like as an individual user, I can manage those barriers on my phone. I can switch between different applications pretty easily. How do we do that in an enterprise context is, I think, where we need to be going.
Right. That's great. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
I was just wondering, the ThoughtWorks culture that you talk about that has to go into the other organizations that you work in, what is that culture?
Okay, so we are like I said, we're 4,000 people, but we're a very, very flat organization. When you ask who my boss is, I struggle to answer the question. I can think of maybe 5 people that might be the person, or 3,500 people, or 4,000 people. A lot of that is around working in a very decentralized way, pushing decision-making down to the people who are in client sites specifically. And it's a very human-based way of communicating that we have, not a top-down hierarchy.
Well, you could maybe touch on the knowledge-based concept, right?
Yeah, one of the things that, as an organization, as a consulting organization, one of the things that you provide as value is the ability to bring to bear expertise from a large number of people to a problem. And the way of thinking around that for us has shifted from, we don't have a big stock of here's all the things we know. It's actually much more about being connected back into a number of people who I can go and ask a question of. And so our culture is very much one of providing connections between people and a way of navigating those connections very quickly so that we can bring to bear that expertise on a specific problem, not have to go and look up things through a big manual or a book or that sort of thing.
So that's why communication for them is so important in terms of the agility of the communication system that they use. Any other questions? Great. Well, we will be back at the Fuze booth. If you guys think of anything else or want to catch Andy, he'll be here for the next little while. Just look for the Fuze booth and a sea of people in purple shirts. And thanks again for coming out today, and enjoy the rest of the show.